Hey, Ryan, can you hear me?
Hey, Joe, sorry about that. Now I can hear you.
All right. Did you want me to use video or?
Yeah, I'm gonna get mine on here.
No worries.
There we go.
Awesome.
We'll get started here for those of you that have joined. We'll get started here in just a second. I just want to get a few things set up here before we get going. All right, Joe, you ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So everybody, welcome to our webinar series here. Today we have Joe Duvall of Honeywell Aerospace. He's their chief test pilot over there, and he's got some pretty cool insight on the flight test operation, the flight test process, and what goes into that side of the house. So without further ado, Joe, would you like to kind of introduce yourself, talk about your background a little bit and how you got started?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me. I am at an airport, so if you hear, there might be some airplanes going by. I hope my audio is okay. But with everything picking up, it's good. It's a good sound to hear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I started my flying career about 30 years ago in the Air Force. Here in the Phoenix area, I went to got trained at what used to be Williams Air Force Base. It's Mesa Gateway Airport now. Flew C-130s and a VIP 707 in the Air Force, and then got out and got into some corporate flying as well, and then finally got into what I thought was going to be my pinnacle job, getting an airline job. I was at American Airlines for a little while. Got furloughed right after 9/11, and then stumbled over the right rock, I like to say, and started working with MIT flight test, and I've been in flight test ever since. So that's going on almost 20 years now that I've been doing flight test. Stumbled over another great rock and got to Honeywell about almost 16 years ago, flying their Boeing 720, doing engine testing. We've replaced that airplane with the 757, and I've been flying that ever since. We've owned that for almost about the same time we bought that airplane, just a few months after I joined Honeywell. And, so now I get to oversee the whole operation, or the whole flight test operation here for Honeywell. We've got a wonderful, very varied fleet of aircraft, all the way from single engine pistons up to the 757. So I like to say one of the best jobs at Honeywell.
So that actually leads me to my next question. So why don't you discuss a little bit about the flight test operation there at Honeywell and its role in the overall organization?
Yeah, it is, like I say, it's the best job. We get to see, we get to interface with the whole gamut of Honeywell Aerospace, from the inception of some kind of product with our advanced tech team, where they're just thinking stuff up and trying new things, then following a product through its whole life cycle, through the development of a product, through the certification of those products, and even into the sales, the marketing piece of it. We can take airplanes and go demonstrate the technology that we're developing, work on in-service issues if those arise, and make improvements, make new versions of software or hardware, what have you. and really get an interface with the whole part of Honeywell Aerospace. It's really a fun place to be.
So, Joe, what kind of utilities does Honeywell test on these aircraft? It's everything sort of from avionics to engines. Am I correct?
Exactly. Yeah, everything that we make a lot of stuff for aircraft. I mean, I'm sure most of your viewers know that there's hardly an aircraft out there flying that doesn't have something that's Honeywell produced on it. So, just like you said, it's from avionics. We make wheels and brakes. We make the APUs. We make engines. We make cabin entertainment systems. Even, for instance, we have a Gulfstream here that has the window shades that go up and down. And the control of those things. That's all Honeywell content there. So it's a big variety of products. Not all of them need to be flight tested. Some of them are made and don't really require that bit of being exposed to the environment of flight tests. But certainly things like engines, a lot of the things that are dealing with like our radio frequency energy, even weather radars, transponders, communication management. Data links quite a big thing in these last few years. So ensuring that those systems work everywhere in the world, we do get to take the aircraft literally around the world to do some of this testing.
So why don't you discuss a little bit about, I mean, you mentioned it briefly earlier, but the different aircraft types that Honeywell has and what each of those, or what the more significant ones do.
Sure, yeah. We like to think of a lot of them, or most of them, to be kind of a strategic aircraft. We don't just do one specific thing with most of them. So we call them strategic or generic flying test beds. The 757 is a great example. There's a picture of it behind me if people haven't seen it, but the aircraft has been with us, like I mentioned, almost 16 years. It was originally purchased with the intention of doing, we have an airplane of that size to do engine flight testing, but the aircraft has a lot of real estate on it, right? It has a lot of room. It has a lot of Honeywell content that it was delivered with, and we can test so many more things than just engines with that aircraft, making it, really more viable. In fact, these days when we fly it, on any particular flight, we'll be gathering data for 4 or 5, maybe even more programs that are almost not permanent installations, but they're long-term installations on the aircraft. So we have some of the other significant aircraft we have here. We just going kind of down in size. We have an Embraer 170. We have a Falcon 900 and a Gulfstream 550 in the business jet kind of categories. Then getting down a little smaller, we have a King Air B200 and a Pilatus PC-12. And then we have a few piston, single and twin engine piston aircraft. And you can see the utility in some cases where, there are kind of some specific examples. The general aviation aircraft we do use primarily for some of the Bendix King products, but even something like a King Air, because it's so inexpensive relatively to operate. We've tested products that might go on a Boeing 787, almost primarily on that aircraft. One of the products there would be we make a navigation radio, integrated navigation radio for the 787, and we would just, in our world, we built a pallet. Basically, you can imagine a pallet, a metal pallet, with that radio and some of the other equipment that it would need, and then we can figure out how to physically mount that, but also electrically connect it to power and all the data and all the connections that it needs. And we can go do most of the testing for a product like that in a King Air, which again just makes a lot more sense than trying to fly it around and spending that same amount of money or same amount of time flying something like a 757. So the airplanes are like the Gulfstream and the Falcon and the Embraer have our integrated cockpits in them. So we do quite a bit of testing on those systems in those aircraft. And again, we try to make the aircraft more viable. They have, as I mentioned in the Gulfstream, we even have the the window shades, but we have communications products. We have the radar. We have quite a number of other products in those aircraft, and we can modify the airplanes to test all of those things. And we just we make a conscious decision about which plane to use, just based on the profiles of the flight test and maybe how long, or even the schedules of the aircraft. If the King Air, for instance, were busy doing something else, we might choose a different airplane to do that same product.
Right. So shifting gears a little bit, no pun intended. So I want to talk a little bit about the engine testing component, because I know Honeywell does quite a bit of that. How does that work? What's the process of doing an engine test? I know this is a bit of a loaded question, and the planning that goes into it, and what's done to test a power plant.
Yeah, so it is a little bit different, only in the fact that there's a part 33 for the combined federal regulations that describes some of the testing that needs to be done for an engine. Avionics, maybe other products don't have that kind of structure, I'll say, that drive what needs to be tested. But for our part, I won't say we're the end of the line, but there's quite a bit of ground testing. We have, they do have engine test cells. We have engine test cells that will be used for, in the process of kind of getting some confidence, assuming that we're talking about maybe a completely new engine, or even a derivative of an engine that has enough, changes inside it, or components that have changed or improved. So there'll be a whole series of tests that are done on the ground, and the team that's doing that or managing that testing will follow the engine through that part of the testing, and then come to us for the flight testing part of it. So we're another one of these, basically a test facility for the engines. So we'll be tracking the engine's progress, through that, and we'll understand the engine is going to be instrumented. We'll understand how it's built up. In other words, how it's another part of the company, the team that put the instrumentation and things inside the engine that we'll end up interfacing with and connecting to gather data. We'll have to know what's been installed and what's important to that kind of test. Some of the basic kind of tests we do with engines are performance testing, operability, maybe starting, things like that. There's 4 or 5 categories that are the regular kinds of testings we do. But so we'll know what kind of, what's expected to be tested on this aircraft, on the engine, and what it's instrumented for. So following that, we'll get a document that describes the test matrix, the points that are the test points that need to be accomplished. We'll get an instrumentation list, that stuff I was describing, the other team that's already built into the engine, probes, and maybe it's temperatures and pressures, maybe it's vibration things, maybe it's it's quite a host of things that can be built into the engine so that we can gather the data. So we'll sort out how to connect and interface to all that, and we'll have to outfit the aircraft to be able to collect all that data. So there's a bit of a process there, back and forth, understanding what the progress of the testing is doing on the ground, and then also understanding when, what we need to interface to. And then we'll get the engine. It'll take us about a day probably to mechanically install it. Just like replacing an engine or putting an engine on another airplane, we'll have to install that, the basic parts of the engine. And then it might take us another few days to hook up all that instrumentation and making sure that it's end-to-end checks and everything's working. We'll do some ground checks and just simple stuff to make sure things don't leak, and and then moving on, making sure that the instrumentation is actually working as we run the engine. And then we'll start some of the flight tests. And we're basically just measuring everything that goes in and everything that comes out of the engine. Even with performance, one of the questions we get asked a lot about is, what is that? Is that little engine up there going to push this big airplane around? So the purpose of having a big airplane is so that we can do this safely. We're not relying on the thrust of our engines. The engines we make are like our HTF 7000 series are about 7,000 pounds of thrust, or a little higher. The main engines on the 757 are 40,000 pounds, so they're 6 times as much almost. But we're not using in other words, we're not using the airplane or the little engine to propel the aircraft at all. We're just measuring things that come in, everything that comes in and everything that goes out, so we can measure performance or measure operability. And there'll be a series of flights to accomplish that matrix of test points that I talked about earlier, and that may, maybe 2 or 3 flights or maybe longer. Most of the profiles for the engine testing start out at a lower altitude and then climb up higher as we burn off fuel and can achieve the higher altitudes. So we may start out with our 757, we may start out at 5,000 feet, for instance, and just be VFR, finding a place that's not very populated with other aircraft and maybe do some orbits or whatever. And then we would climb all the way up to as high as 45,000 feet, maybe on the same flight, just stopping at different altitudes and airspeeds along the way. There'll be a whole profile that we've worked out with the other test engineers and everything prior to that. And so that, those are the typical kinds of flights. They might last anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, I'd say. So that whole process I'm describing, at least from our perspective, could take a couple of weeks, or maybe it takes about a whole month to get through.
Right. So besides engine testing per se, can you describe some of the other flight tests that Honeywell does? I know there's a component in there of that the weather radar testing and that kind of work that you all do.
Yeah, and so there's at a high enough level that it follows the same process. We're going to get a request from some other part of Honeywell, the engineering team that's in charge of that product. So in the weather radar case, we have a whole team of engineers that develop weather radar products. So we'll get a request from them to go to do some kind of a test and work with them again to get their piece of equipment installed on the aircraft. I mean, weather radar, most of our aircraft have weather radar installed, except for some of the very small ones. So, that process isn't as difficult as, say, attaching an engine to an airplane. But we'll have to figure out that specific box and making sure that specific box has the right, that we're getting at the right power, and of course that we're getting the right data off of it. That's our, at the end of the day, that's our real job here, is to provide accurate and repeatable data for those other parts of Honeywell that we're the systems people that are either working on that radar or working on that engine or some of those other products. So we've got to be sure that we're in concert with them on the request that they have. So for weather radar, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so how is that data used to shape the Honeywell product down the road?
Yeah, it's really about making sure that the products are robust and safe for the flying public, right? I mean, these products are going to be put on airliners or business jets or general aviation aircraft, and we kind of think of ourselves maybe as Honeywell's first customer. We get to see and experience the products. In the case of a weather radar, you're certainly going to have the pilots will have some input on like human factors, things, how the coloring might be working, how the display is really working to display those, what it's supposed to be displaying, in this case, weather. Just the functionality in different areas, all those things. So we're really driving the whole robustness and safety and usability of the product so that we have a better product going out the door, and really making a differential. We're really a differentiator for Honeywell in that case.
So from a training perspective, how many pilots do you guys, does Honeywell have?
The flight test group, we average around 10 or 12 pilots. We all fly different aircraft. We generally, I would say about 3 of the we each fly about 3 of the airplanes. Some fly more, some maybe a little bit less. But yeah, I've flown a Bonanza in the morning and a 757 in the afternoon, for instance, for doing some flight testing. And we have a varied background. The crew, the pilot group here has quite a varied background, from military or airline or business jet backgrounds as well.
Right. So that kind of leads to my other question here. So what does a pilot have to do to get involved in something like flight testing, especially at an organization like Honeywell? And are there specific regulatory certifications involved in doing that line of flying?
So just to, I think the way that I like to answer some of this kind of, when I think about what it takes to get here, first of all, there's quite a different culture. I mean, people for flight testing, and there's different culture for people that want to be an airline pilot or a corporate pilot. I think people that are starting out thinking about being a pilot, they may not understand some of those different nuances, and probably best thing is to try to experience some of them because they are kind of different. Just from a culture standpoint, I have been in the military, I've worked corporate, and I've worked the airline world. What I like to say about this job is at least I get to sleep in my own bed most nights, because most pilot jobs are involved, dragging a suitcase to work. When you get on an airplane and you're gone for a few days or a few weeks maybe at a time. So I just wanted to explain something about that culture. The corporate aviation folks certainly have a customer service aspect that they like, that they need to be involved in. I mean, they're in front of their customer who is probably an executive or something like that, versus an airline pilot where, you don't really see them in the back of the airplane unless there's a problem. So there's just some differences about the culture if somebody wants to start out being a pilot. I would say that for flight tests, especially for Honeywell, with that varied fleet of aircraft and also the varied products that we have, we really look for somebody that does have a background in a number of areas within aviation, so that they can provide that experience and provide, I mentioned about human factors and trying to drive these products to be the right product for the right mission. If the product's going to go on an airliner, it might have, there might be some differences in the way you think about it versus it going on a corporate plane or another type of airplane. So we do value that experience across the different kind of cultures again of aviation. We don't necessarily pick out people that are from one group or another, but I do believe that having a variety of background is important and experience in that case. There aren't any in the U.S. There aren't any licenses or things that are required. I guess the other thing I would mention too about the cultures, there's also different types of flight testing where we're doing experimental product flight testing versus an airframer like a Boeing or maybe Gulfstream, where those pilots are testing new aircraft or something more complete about the whole airframe. This is a little different type of flight testing. I'm just saying there's different cultures or different groups within that. But anyway, there are no licenses that the U.S. that are required. There are certainly schools to go to. There's a National Test Pilot School, which has some wonderful courses. They have a master's level course that it takes about a year to get through. There's also other shorter courses that they offer, and more maybe either in a general sense for flight testing or maybe more specifically about different aspects of flight testing. There's also your schools in other parts of the world. I do believe that in Europe there's a requirement for some licensing, and some of that stuff's certainly been looked at from both a pilot and also another important part of our crew is a flight test engineer. And so there's specific training, and there are licenses I believe in Europe for that work.
Got it. So can you describe just a little bit for our group here some of the more interesting flights you've done, whether it was on the 757 or any of the aircraft types that Honeywell has?
Yeah, no, well, like I said, it's a fun place to work. One of the more interesting things we do, back to weather radar, is wind shear testing. We always it's a bit of a funny thing in general. I think you were on our flight. We were talking about doing some smart landing, smart runway, which is a product of ours for stabilized approach monitoring. And in that regard, we say we as pilots as test pilots have to be good at making bad approaches. So we have to go out and we purposely make an approach that isn't stable, so that we can make sure that the system is working and catching those, alerting the crew when it's supposed to be. So with wind shear testing, we also need to go out and find and seek out something that's going to cause wind shear, and the right situation, the right environmental setup to cause wind shear, so that the system is, again, robust and safe, and it can accurately see this kind of condition. Now, we also do a lot of risk mitigation. So what we generally do for something like wind shear testing, we would go to a place like southern Florida, not over the Everglades, maybe where it's flat, but we can guarantee some isolated storms. So we have a very good predictability about when we're going to be seeing this wind shear. But so we did this in the 757 when we were developing one of our radars. It's the RDR 4000 for air transport aircraft. So the first thing we did is we went into a simulator and practiced this, what our approach to these storms would be like. And we'd already had some experience doing this in our Convair 580 aircraft, which we've divested, but that was actually purposely bought for wind shear testing. It had a straight blown wing, so going into wind shear events at low altitude, you had a pretty safe environment to do that in. But we needed to do this in the 757 as well. So taking some of that experience from the Convair 580 flying, we went into the simulator, went into a 757 simulator, and we were able to program and use that simulator to simulate the wind shear events, practice the profile, the way that we were going to approach the storms, and do it safely. And one of the things about this is, the wind shear is going to be something that's going to be a problem down low, below 1,000 feet, let's say. And in most cases, an aircraft is either going to be on takeoff or departure when they're experiencing this. So they're going to be configured with the view down. They may be at a kind of a low energy state. So we ensured that we were in a bit higher energy. We were, as part of the risk mitigation, but we still needed to be down low at 1,000 feet or below. So anyway, after working it out in the simulator and getting our profiles correct, we took the airplane down to southern Florida and flew around the Everglades and about 1,000 feet, and would point ourselves right at these storms and watch the wind shear system activate and detect it properly and get all the data. But we did that for a number of days. Pretty exciting, flying down low, right into storms that are other places and other people, would be avoiding.
Right. So most pilots avoid the storms, but you guys are seeking them out.
Yeah, we have to do that at high. For other weather radar things, we also have to kind of seek out the weather that's the bad weather to go fly toward it. Maybe not always through it, but certainly toward it to make sure that the system's detecting it properly. But that's that's still pretty fun. And again, we're mitigating the risk, but it's still unusual, and it's not what normal or other pilots are doing, right?
So I'm just reading from my thing here. We have a question from the audience that was submitted through the site, and I'll just read off here. So John says, "Hi, Joe. I work for the world's largest commercial airline. There will be a critical shortage of pilots as mandatory retirements in the U.S. is 65. Of course, some 15 years ago, it was 60. Two questions here. Should the age be moved to 70 with more health monitoring, say a 3-year rather than a 2, I assume medical in place now? And secondly, how young are you, Joe?"
To give away my age. Did I already say I've been flying for 30 years? And I was in pilot training 30 years ago, so maybe that helps. Yeah, I'm in my middle 50s, so I've got something to think about there for retirement ages. I don't know that I'm in any place to determine whether the age should be changed. I know, like the question was written there, that you stated that it used to be 60 and they moved it to 65. I don't know that I've heard in that change that anybody has seen anything detrimental, I guess I'll say, about that. So I'm not sure that it should be moved any higher. I guess I don't feel like I'm in a place to really comment on how old folks should be. I think a lot of people, I see some folks, retire and then they go out and they get some kind of a contract job and continue to fly. So some people continue to do that into their later life and enjoy it. Other people I know have retired even earlier than 65 because they're ready to retire, ready to do something else and have fun.
Well, let me, because it's kind of a good question. So in terms of the Honeywell structure, because I know on the corporate aviation side, 125, 135, you don't necessarily need to retire at 65. But on the Honeywell side, are you guys mandated to retire at 65? Because I'm not sure what part you all would fall under there.
No, we don't. So yeah, you're right. The age 65, I know it's for 121 carriers, and we operate under Part 91, so we wouldn't have that same rule from the FAA, right? And we don't necessarily have a rule for when people need to retire. So people do work for us later than 65.
Gotcha. Somebody just put it in the chat, and I think it's actually a really good question, so I will ask it. What's your all-time favorite aircraft, Joe?
Well, these are different. These are difficult. I cut my teeth. Just because the way I always think of it, I cut my teeth flying the C-130, and I tell you that thing can do just about anything. I take a quote from one of my navigators once. It's quite possibly the most capable aircraft in the United States Air Force inventory, which is a line that all the people that work for me know that I say that all the time. So I just absolutely love that airplane. I think that's probably certainly on the top. But since I've been flying the 757 for 16 years, I like what it can do too. It's a great performer. Looks good on the ramp, and it keeps amazing me what the things that we end up making that aircraft do, and that it wasn't always designed for. So it's a close tie, I'll say, between the C-130 and the 757.
Got it. Well, that's all the questions we had, and we're coming right up on 11:30 here. So just want to say thank you, Joe. This was a really, really interesting discussion. And I just, for the audience, I've ridden with Joe before, and I can tell you he butters every landing. So
well, he was on a good day, I guess.
yeah, yeah, it was.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. I really enjoyed it, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks.